I stepped up to the small wooden podium surrounded by a circle of chairs. Public speaking had always been my nemesis ever since my middle school speech class days. My knees were trembling, and I was terrified my voice might break as I looked at the 10 or so men seated before me. I took a deep breath to steady myself and began, "Hello, my name is Mike." After a brief pause to gather my thoughts, I continued, and I let the words hang in the air for about 10 seconds, watching for their reactions. Most of them seemed startled, their expressions ranging from disbelief to blank stares, but not one of them smirked at my self-deprecating admission. "Well, not really," I added, "but being branded that way pisses me off to no end. This is my second meeting, and after listening to several of you share your stories, I've decided to share mine. Unlike most of you, I'm still married. My lawyer advised me to get counseling for anger management, while we work on my divorce case and I get everything in order. So far, it seems to be helping. At least I haven't killed anyone yet." This drew smiles and soft laughter from the group. Before all this started, I didn't think I was a gullible man. I had no idea I was so unobservant, I admitted. I genuinely believed I was a loving husband, and hopefully soon, a proud father. I never considered myself a victim, nor did I ever think of myself as a loser. I wasn't the best at everything I did, but I was always up there in the almost made it category. In high school, I was in the top quarter of my class academically, and the same went for college. I graduated with a solid 3.3 GPA, more than enough to get into grad school, where I did fairly well while working as an accountant. After graduation, with a bit more experience under my belt, I landed a good job as a CPA and thought I was on a solid path to success. Then the rug was pulled out from under me. Academic and financial success is one thing, but to have the one thing that defines your core ripped away is the worst a man can face, I said. For your wife to tell you that you're not good enough for her, well, maybe not directly and verbally, but rather in deed, is devastating. I began to hyperventilate. I grabbed that little podium and held on like it was a life raft in a choppy sea. "Sorry, I got a little off target there," I said as I regrouped. 2 men in the front row gave me a thumbs up and a nod to tell me they understood and for me to keep going. "Let me backtrack," I said. "I'm not going to start telling you how beautiful my wife is, how big her assets are, and all that. I'm not going to describe our sex life and claim it was super hot, like we had wild sex every day. I will say we were active in bed and seemed to have a great life outside of the bedroom as well. She was my best friend and my life partner, so I thought. Sarah and I met in college the semester before I graduated with my bachelor's degree. We hit it off and married that next summer. I got a decent job right away as an accountant, so I could afford to pay for her to finish her degree. Then, after the year of work experience I needed, I went on to get my CPA, while Sarah became a paralegal. Lately, she has announced aspirations to go to law school." I snorted. "Good luck with that. I will not be the one paying for it." That got a few chuckles from the audience. With 2 sets of college loans, we held off having kids or even buying a house until we both felt comfortable we could afford the expense, I said. Last year, after 6 years of marriage, we bought an older 4-bedroom home, and I completely remodeled it. I gutted the interior to the studs and even changed up the floor plan to suit us. I turned it into just what Sarah and I envisioned as our future home. My older brother is a contractor who specializes in remodeling older homes and turning them into what his clients envision. I worked for him every summer while in school, so I felt I had the skills needed to get a house and rebuild it to make it the best it could be. My brother helped me when I began and even got his subcontractors to give me special rates for things outside of my own expertise. Of course, several of those contractors were already my accounting clients, so part of the work was quid pro quo. In other words, I don't have a whole lot of money tied up in the house itself, but the value, if I sold it now, would be triple what we have invested in it. Sarah got her dream home and seemed thrilled and content. 3 months ago, she announced she was ready to get pregnant, and it only took a month before she disclosed she was with child. I should be over the moon, and at first I was. The thing is, the baby is not mine, or at least I am pretty sure it isn't, and at this point, I sincerely hope I am right. I admitted I'm not exactly sure how long my wife has been cheating on me, but looking back, I suspect it's been on and off for much of the past 6 months at least. She had ample time to stray while I busted my hump working as an accountant and renovating our future home evenings and weekends. Now, I'm sure many of you wonder how I found out about Sarah's activities. I got several nods. Nothing like some of you guess, no late nights, no quick showers when the woman came home, no men's underwear under the bed, or anything like that. It started with a simple phone call. I overheard her talking to someone on the phone while she was in the bedroom, and thought she was alone. She and whoever were talking about what to pack for an upcoming business trip. Hearing Sarah's side, I surmised she was talking to a woman. What caught my attention was when Sarah said something about how the woman should bring her big toy, and how she might not be able to take rough play for too much longer. She said something like, "Yeah, I know you told me I can have intense sessions until just weeks before I deliver, but this is my first child. I haven't popped out two already like you, and am not sure how much longer I can take Rob and Tyson at the same time." Now, I knew Rob is her boss' first name. She continued and laughed. "Tyson is barely as big as Mike. Of course, I love a damn girl, you know that, but this baby bump is really starting to show. I'm going to have to start buying new clothes soon. Nope, I still haven't gotten myself tested. I'm a little nervous it might be Rob's kid. Oh yeah, he had fun with me more times than Mike in the past few months, and the timing is about right for that meeting in Seattle. Plus, Mike was coming home too late at night, and too tired to really please me like I wanted around then. I was at my most fertile time. Mike never caught on. I saw a series of grins around the room. Okay, I know some of you are thinking I'm making this up, that I couldn't possibly remember a conversation with that much detail, especially if I was upset. Well, I've listened to that conversation dozens of times in the past few weeks. I recorded it on my cell phone, I said. I saw a few nods and expressions change from obvious skepticism to acceptance. I called a security guy my brother uses for help. He installed a couple of cameras and recording devices, plus provided a few I could put in her purse and briefcase. I caught her screwing in my bed a few times while I was at work and got some interesting audio conversations. She is doing both her boss and the secretary often at the same time. The secretary is married with a couple of kids. From what I gather, they do threesomes when they can, and the boss often does one or the other at work. Sometimes the women play. You've got to wonder how they get any work done from the sound of it. I want to bring up one thing the therapist asked me. He asked me to try to get into Sarah's head so I could understand her motivation to step outside of our marriage for sex, if perhaps she was frustrated with our long hours apart, and she needed some physical and emotional contact to make up for it. Well, I'll tell you all the same thing I told him: I don't care. She cheated, simple as that. If she was feeling lonely or needy, she could easily have said something, asked for a little more time. But she didn't. She decided to go off and get laid. The reason is moot. Okay, that's about all I have. Thank you for letting me vent. I am in the process now of divorcing her. She left this morning for another out-of-town meeting with some corporate client, and yes, the boss and secretary are going. I concluded my talk. Before I stepped away from the podium, one of the men, a big, grizzled guy, spoke up. "Why didn't you go stomp a mud hole in the guy's butt?" Of course, I have no idea who did it, as I was not there and had a good alibi, but the guy who was screwing my ex got his jaw broken and his face stomped to a pulp. Nobody saw a thing. Random attack, according to the cops. There was laughter all around. I told them I hadn't even confronted the soon-to-be wife yet. He was still in the process of making plans. I got some incredulous looks. The main reason I am even here at these meetings is to keep a lid on my rage. Oh, I can't tell you I haven't imagined using a baseball bat or even putting a few bullets in Rob's butt. But I am not about to risk jail. That macho crap of standing up and fighting for my woman like a man is just that crap. She isn't my woman if she doesn't want to act like it. Another guy asked if, after hearing the conversation, I started paying attention to see if my wife was different after sex with others. I haven't touched her since the night I overheard that conversation, I said. I got COVID. I tested positive that very night and have slept in the guest room, quarantining since. Matter of fact, I might have the record for testing positive for 3 weeks. Actually, I looked it up online, and it says in some cases I could be positive for a month, and with the pregnancy, it's just safer for me to sleep in another room. I grinned. I got some smiles and thumbs up. A couple of guys said they would have messed her up and made it hurt. I stepped away from the podium. The group moderator, the therapist, stepped forward and thanked me for being honest and sharing. He asked me to continue to come to the open meetings as well as our private counseling sessions. I told him I would consider it. I might need to blow off more steam later, but for now, the lion was kept in its cage. I had only gone to him at my attorney's insistence. My lawyer said I was on the edge of losing it and needed a relief valve. Just making plans to divorce Sarah was not enough to temper my anger. Unlike at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, these gatherings ended with everybody having a drink. We all adjourned to the bar down the block. So you haven't even told her you know she's cheating? One guy asked incredulously. I shook my head. Damn. I blew up, slapped my wife down, and then chased the Aholy out the door. Of course, she told me she was going out on a date with the guy when he walked in the door to pick her up. He was standing there grinning when she told me she was going out and probably wouldn't be back until the next morning. If he wasn't so damn fast, I might have killed him. I was kicking in his car door trying to get to him when the cops arrived. That is why I am in these meetings, mandated by the court for anger management. How about these other guys? I asked. Are they in the same boat? Reason I asked is some seem to be getting off on hearing my story. I wonder if any are here for the prospects. The guy gave me a blank look and said, prospects? Yeah, you know, like the old joke, a teenager goes to confession and admits he had sex with the girl at school. The priest asks if it was Mary. The kid says no. The priest asks if it was Susie. Again, no. The priest asks about a third girl, Joan. Again, no. So the priest tells the kid to say 10 Hail Marys. The kid steps outside, and his friend, who has been waiting, asks him what the priest said. The first says he told me to say 10 Hail Marys and gave me 3 good prospects. The other guys at the table laughed. You seem like a stand-up guy, one guy said. If later you want somebody to do a little butt kicking while you were in church in front of a bunch of witnesses, let me know. I asked him how he knew I wasn't a cop setting him up. Because I worked for your brother on occasion as a sheetrock subcontractor. I remember seeing you on the job a while back. You probably don't recognize me cause I used to have a big beard and longer hair, too noticeable, if you know what I mean. I made a mental note to ask my brother for the guy's story sometime. I told him I was still just getting everything together, like my lawyer advised, then I would have her served and go from there. I limited myself to 2 beers. I was surprised at how much better I felt as I drove home. Maybe there really was something to that, letting people, even total strangers, know your troubles. Crap, confession or letting your demons out may be good for the soul, but I had work to get done. I was on a mission. Like I would told the guys at the meeting, my soon-to-be wife had left for the week with her boss and the secretary, Jessica. They planned to be gone the whole week to meet with a corporate client. I suspected the work would be finished in 2 days. I knew it was a farce and knew what they intended long before I was told they might stay to visit the jazz festival on the company's dime that weekend. Sarah was going to get comp time, so she'd have a few days off the following week. She'd suggested I take off work too so we could have must time. I knew she was just trying to keep me sexually satisfied and oblivious. 2 weeks later, I walked into the meeting room a little late. The others had taken their seats while the therapist was trying to get the meeting going by talking about how releasing your inner demons verbally was better than lashing out physically and risking criminal or civil consequences. I wasn't trying to make an entrance, but the room broke into cheers as soon as I stepped inside. Glad to have you back, Mike. I know these guys want to hear the rest of the story from the man himself, my therapist announced. Okay, I said, grinning, expressing a happiness I didn't feel inside. I was, however, content for the moment. I stepped up to the podium. A couple of weeks ago, I told you my tale about how my wife was cheating on me with her boss, possibly even pregnant by him. Not only that, but the legal secretary was also involved, and the 3 apparently enjoyed threesomes whenever they could. Well, today I am going to tell you the rest of the story. When I related what I knew to you guys, I hadn't told the Aholy's wife nor the husband of the other woman anything I would found out, not that they didn't deserve to know, but I didn't want them to overreact and blow my plans out of the water. I wanted to give my wife the screwing of her life out sexually, because she would have enjoyed that. I waited until Thursday night of that week before telling either of the others what our spouses were doing while away. I apologized for my delay and explained why, then told them I was going to have Sarah served at the airport upon their arrival back Sunday afternoon. I suggested they contact attorneys and gave them my lawyer's name. I asked them not to call or text their spouses and revealed they'd been caught. After the initial shock wore off a bit, we started to talk. I found out that, like in my case, each of the cheaters called home every night to say how much they missed us and wished they were home. We all knew we were being fed a load of crap. At my urging, Maria Rob's wife decided to take her kids to visit her sister and brother-in-law up in Oakfield. She was going to confide in them and have them come back and be with her when she confronted her husband upon his return. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Head cheated. She has 2 teenage kids she had to contend with as well. Bill, the secretary's husband, couldn't get out of work for the weekend and runs the maintenance department for the Chevy dealership here in town. He did promise not to call his wife, Jessica. He said he wanted to choke her to death without witnesses. I told him about this group and how it helped me subdue those same impulses. I got a bit of laughter. Anyway, I told both what I did with my finances and explained why I would remove half of our savings and checking account balances. In my case, that wasn't much, but they each admitted to having a fair amount in their accounts. I told them I wasn't going to cancel my credit cards until the last minute, but I would pay the bill out of the joint account to make sure my wife paid her half. I left them to stew on what they needed to do and went home. I'm sure you guys heard what I did at home, and it's all true. I got cheers and applause. I took a half bow. Yes, I spent the week dismantling my home. By dismantling, I mean I took it apart but didn't damage a single item. Some of you might remember from my earlier explanation, but I did most of the work renovating my house myself, with a little of my brother's help. What I did was take back that work. I reversed it. I had to leave the sheetrock up with the texture and paint, but that and the carpet were about all I left untouched. I disconnected every appliance and moved it away from the wall. The stove, dishwasher, refrigerator were all unplugged, and even the connecting wiring harnesses were removed. Every bit of hardware was carefully bagged and attached to the appliance. I even took out the garbage disposal and left it in the middle of the kitchen floor with the sink and faucets all taken apart and removed. I decided to leave the kitchen cabinets. I could have taken them down, and did take a few that 2 of us could lift easily after loosening the retaining bolts, but that was just to show the Soontobex that her pretty kitchen was no more. I also left the kitchen counters alone, as I had used a one-piece system that I couldn't take away from the wall without damage. That wasn't the case in the bathrooms. I drained and removed the toilets, took the vanities apart again, even taking off the faucet handles. We even cleaned the edges of the vanities and sinks to remove plaster, and when we were finished, it looked like a pile of used bathroom fixtures. Only a few pipes and cut-off valves poked out of the walls. The tub and shower stall were untouched for the same reason I left the kitchen counters. Next, I took the bed and dresser apart as much as I could. The bed was easy mattress, box springs, and all came apart easily and were stacked in the hallway. All I could do with the dresser was empty it. All my wife's clothes were put into our bedroom closet, which, of course, no longer had the pretty louvered doors. Our furniture looked nice and actually was very expensive, but like a lot of furniture nowadays, it's screwed together. We bought most of ours unassembled. I disassembled everything that originally came that way. My wife hadn't lifted a finger to help put them together. The shelving units lay in pieces on the floor. The credenza that held my booze and all my wife's little knickknacks was collapsed with all the hardware carefully bagged. I wanted to make sure nothing was damaged. The last things to remove were the ceiling fans and light fixtures from each room. The only thing I left was the chandelier in the dining room, but I took the light bulbs out of that. Oh yes, I removed every electrical switch and plug socket in the house. We capped the wires even though the electricity was off. I would had to contract out for the air conditioning system to be installed, so I left that alone. I would put in the water heater myself but left it intact as well. Now you may be wondering what I did with all the stuff I took out of the cabinets, shelves, and off the walls. Well, I wanted none of that stuff, as it would remind me of the cheating. So we spread it across the floor of the master bedroom. I mean, every dish and glass, every little figurine was placed carefully from the front of the closet to the door. You couldn't walk from the door to the closet without clearing a path first. Well, I take that back, as the door wasn't there anymore either, nor were there any doors hanging except the exterior doors, which I left in place for security. I explained before that I am an accountant. Well, I kept a receipt for everything we bought to put into that house. My wife and I paid for it out of our communal assets, so I was going to give her back half of those appliances and fixtures just without the work, or what I called sweat equity I had in the house. My wife had done virtually nothing to help except pick out the appliances and help plan the renovations. I took a few mobile appliances, like the coffee pot and microwave, that sort of thing. It'll give my ex something else to argue about. I got some appreciative laughter from the group. By the time her plane sat down at the airport, everything in the house that I had assembled or installed had been taken apart. I got a call from the process server who handed her the divorce papers, and I sat back to wait for her to come home. Jessica, the secretary, had driven them to the airport in her van, so she dropped them off. My brother and I were waiting with a couple of the neighbors who wanted to see the rest of the show. They'd been watching me take apart the house all week and could testify where I had been and what I was doing while waiting for the cheaters to get home. We had been consuming the contents of my liquor cabinet and eating the steaks from my freezer. I would kept back all the rest of the food, which was taken to Sarah's mother's house earlier in the week. I told her my freezer had gone out, but that didn't explain all the canned goods and condiments I dropped off. The poor woman was too confused to ask what was going on. I knew she'd find out before long. Jessica stuck around only long enough to let Sarah and Rob out of the van. I wondered why Rob even came home with her. I walked around to the front, leaving the others to watch from the side of the house as Sarah clambered out of the van, followed by Rob, her lover. Both were fit to be tied well. She was yelling, waving the envelope she had been given, and he was angry, demanding to know what kind of lies I might have told his wife and saying he was going to bury me legally for casting aspersions on his character. I had filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, and named him as one of the parties. As you all know, the courts don't really care about the reason for a divorce, but my claim of adultery added a bit of embarrassment because it would be part of the public record. Around the same time, Rob's wife, Maria, arrived with her sister. I would given Maria a call since I knew Sarah's time of arrival. I had been tracking her cell phone. They were on their way, and Maria had already phoned me to tell me part of what she found when she returned home after her weekend away. She asked if I had been to her house that weekend. I told her truthfully that I had been working hard at my own house and barely went anywhere else except to my brother's to sleep at night. Apparently, Maria couldn't park in her garage when she got home because the whole driveway was filled with car parts, not just any car parts, but the pieces that had once been her husband's beloved 1967 Camaro. It was his pride and joy, and he would show it off to every visitor to his house. The car had originally been his father's and was Rob's first car, holding great sentimental value. His father had put it into storage, and years later, Rob had the car totally restored. I would heard people joke that he loved that Camaro more than his wife and kids, which might have been an exaggeration but not by much. Of course, Rob was a little upset to see his wife drive up, and he immediately began with a lame comment that whatever she might have heard was a total lie. She didn't tell him what was waiting for him at home. All of us stood outside while my wife took her suitcase inside. Then came the scream from inside the house. Sarah came to the door, screaming, "What the hell did you do to my house?" I knew she didn't have time to really check it out. All she saw was the stuff piled in the living room. I'm surprised she didn't notice the blinds and drapes were missing before she even got inside. I guess she was a little off her game from being served at the airport. Every window was uncovered, since one of the first things I had done was remove the blinds, dismantle them, and fold the drapes. And when I turned off the electricity, the only light we had was from outside during the day or the generator lights we used. I stepped inside, followed by my brother and the rest of the entourage. I calmly informed my soon-to-be ex-wife what I had done. I was preparing the house to split our assets, 50-50. She demanded to know where her stuff was. I waved my hand around the floor and then told her that, if she was referring to her clothes and personal items, they were all safe and sound in the bedroom closet. When she went to look, she was not happy. I had never heard her issue such a shrill scream in all the years we had known each other. Somebody had called the police, and they showed up to listen to my wife scream and yell about how I had demolished her home. I carefully explained what was going on to the first cop on the scene, and he immediately called for his supervisor. I don't know exactly what he said, but within minutes, at least 3 more units showed up. I had called my attorney earlier when I knew Sarah was on her way home, and he finally showed up, apologizing, saying he thought he better change clothes before he arrived. Sarah began to rant about where she would go for the night, and demanded that I be arrested. My lawyer nixed that last idea, telling the police I had done nothing illegal, no crime had been committed, and that this was a matter for civil court. Rob demanded that his wife take him home, but Maria refused, and then she frowned at him and asked why he never looked at his phone. She had texted him a few hours before. He still didn't look, thinking whatever she'd sent him had to do with his alleged cheating. Now, this is conjecture on my part. What he told his wife was that he was busy after Sarah was served at the airport, and he would clear up any misunderstandings about the business trips. At this point, I was trying to monitor 3 or 4 conversations at once. When Sarah asked what I had done with her car, I answered truthfully. "Your car is exactly where you left it, in the garage." She stormed back inside the house. Not 2 minutes later, she stomped back outside, complaining that the garage door wouldn't open. I told her I wasn't surprised, as the electricity was off, plus I had dismantled the garage door opener. She loudly demanded to know how she was supposed to get her car out. Rob heard her, and told her to just pull the emergency release to open the door. She had no idea what that was, so he went inside with her. They came back out, and he demanded to know where the handle for the release was. I shrugged and told him it was around somewhere, carefully marked like every other item I had taken apart. The police were taking notes the whole time, asking for statements from one and all. Then Maria dropped her bombshell that she had not called the police yet, but she had an issue at her home. She showed her cell phone to the police lieutenant who seemed to be in charge. I watched his face change to total incredulity. He looked at me. I told him Maria had shown me the photos, but I had been here at my own home all weekend and had multiple witnesses. Unable to get her car out, and with Maria refusing to take Rob home, they called Jessica back. She arrived disheveled, having been crying. Her husband had met her outside their house with all her clothes stuffed into plastic garbage bags. Had helped her load the bags into her van and told her to leave and not return until she saw her lawyer. He had told me his plans the day before. So now Sarah and Rob put their suitcases into Jessica's van. Maria told him once again he ought to look at his phone. He finally did and then let out a scream that almost matched Sarah's earlier outburst. He yelled for Jessica to get him home fast. I would given Maria a suggestion when she first called me to tell me what she'd found, and she had already acted on it. Her brother-in-law had stayed at her home, and the cops were finished with what they could do at my house. We'd all given our statements, so my brother and I followed the rest to Rob's home. A television news van was already parked in front of his house. The reporter was interviewing Brett, Mariah's brother-in-law, about what the family found when they brought Maria home from her weekend away. Later, I found out the cameraman had already taken full video of the area. The story Brett told was that they couldn't pull all the way around the house to park in the garage because the garage doors and most of the driveway were blocked with car parts. The garage was around the end of the house, and the area was totally obscured from street view. Nobody stopped me from following them up to the house. The scene was great. Most of you men have put together model cars when you were kids, I'm sure. Well, what I saw looked just like what you see when you open a model box, with the exception of the plastic bars holding the little parts. In the center of the drive was a car chassis. To each side lay the doors. Behind the car on the drive was the trunk, and in front, the car hood. I was a little surprised the fenders hadn't been removed as well, nor had the windshield. Virtually every other piece was, though. The engine sat in front of the chassis. Radiator, fan, water pump, starter, generator, carburetor, and all the major parts had been removed. All the belts and hoses were placed neatly in rows to one side. The transmission and whole drivetrain were sitting behind the car. The wheels were removed along with the brake assemblies. Even the seats were removed and sitting off to one side. In telling you, it was impressive. I would never seen a car totally, or almost totally, taken apart. Everything was laid out very neatly, not that any of that mattered. Rob lost it. He began to wail and even started crying. He dropped to his knees and screamed that Camille was destroyed. I asked Maria, "Who's Camille?" The television reporter was standing close by while the cops walked around the car, looking over the scene. I can tell you, I nearly fell over laughing when Maria explained Rob had named his car Camille after his favorite song, Camille the Camaro. I know you all heard about that part once the news reporter broadcast her report. The story was picked up by the network, and then made the full rounds on social media. They played the song Camille the Camaro as the backdrop. None of us spouses were hiding. We all made sure the 3 cheaters were named. Rob accused each of us of the damage to his car, but we all had ironclad alibis. Jessica's husband, Bill, had worked all day Saturday at the dealership and was with their kids that night and all day Sunday. He had the expertise to dismantle the car and possibly the resources, but investigators couldn't link him to anybody who might have been responsible. Apart from Rob's, not a single fingerprint could be found on any part. The police had even checked the lug nuts that had been carefully piled together. Maria was with her sister and brother-in-law all weekend, and even her kids testified to that. She loudly proclaimed she hadn't even thought of doing anything to the car, but if she had, it would have been with a hammer, and she was still considering using a hammer on the parts to finish the job. Even the cops were laughing as she said that. Of course, because of the careful way the car had been dismantled and the parts weren't damaged, I was the number 1 suspect. But I also had an alibi. First of all, I'm no mechanic. I know home repair and renovation, not how a vehicle might be put together. I didn't have much more than a couple of screwdrivers and a few wrenches anyway, plus I was busy taking apart my own home under the amused and watchful eyes of my neighbors. The whole event at Rob's house was a circus. Sarah was there because she had no other transportation besides Jessica, who had been kicked out of her home by her husband. My father-in-law soon showed up after receiving a call from Sarah. He stood wide-eyed, watching the extravagant scene unfold. The reporter called me for a follow-up the next day. She'd heard what I would done to my home and wanted to add that as an angle to her story. I gave her one of the 20 or so flash drives I would made of how I systematically dismantled my home. She condensed 5 hours of video into a 2-minute television segment. Those flash drives proved to save my butt. I gave them out like candy at Halloween. Of course, since I only had 20 drives, I would also included evidence of the 3 culprits cheating. Rob had gotten a restraining order to stop me from publishing anything about his infidelities, but by the time the order was issued, most of those drives had already been distributed. I had no control when some of the evidence, which included them discussing their affair and even video of a few encounters, made the rounds on the internet. Even my father-in-law got a flash drive when he asked if I might be overreacting to perceived events. Tyson was utterly embarrassed to be seen switching places with his 2 female partners. It was cut from the television segments but did show up online that the 3 were videoed in flagranti delicto, a phrase that was mentioned often, even on television. Now, as of today, my status is still up in the air. I intend to push for the divorce to be finalized as soon as possible, but Sarah wants to stay married for the sake of the baby. The paternity test, which my wife initially protested, showed I am not the father of her unborn child. I had to pay extra to get the test expedited, but since the child isn't mine, it'll get some of my money back from the communal assets. Sarah wanted the opportunity to discuss the matter privately and wait until the baby was born to test, but I had made it so public that she had no option but to submit to the test despite her attorney's advice. I have no idea what she plans to do, or if Rob will step forward. He might not even be the father for all I know, but that isn't my concern. My wife got an attorney who claimed I destroyed my home. Mine, of course, argued that I merely took back my work and that none of the components were damaged and everything is ready for resale. The last I heard, the investigation into who dismantled Rob's Camaro had come up empty. The working theory is that it was a team of experienced mechanics, someone with the expertise to remove the major components without leaving a mess. Oil, transmission fluid, coolant, and even brake fluid were drained, and none of the parts were damaged when taken apart. Even Jessica's husband, Bill, admitted to the investigators what it would take to dismantle a car like that. Components that might be compromised, like the manifold covers and valve assemblies, were left alone. Bill told me privately he'd like to hire the men responsible, as they were fast and obviously knew their stuff. He told me that, as much as he loved it, he had absolutely nothing to do with taking the Camaro apart, and he asked if I had. I honestly told him I hadn't. Rob paid through the nose to get the parts picked up and stored. Maria told him he had 2 days to remove the junk, as she called it, from her drive so she'd have access to her garage. Otherwise, she'd hire a couple of neighborhood boys to pile the crap under the carport where Rob had kept the car. He knew she was serious. Before any of you think I came out on top of any of this, I was not unscathed. The very next day after Sarah's return home, I was fired from my job. I knew my boss was a good friend of Rob's. Rob sent him clients, and in turn, he recommended Rob when the need arose. My boss had even been the one to originally suggest Sarah go to work for Rob. When I was told I was fired, I leaned over my boss' desk and asked him point-blank if he had been part of any of the extracurricular activities and, more specifically, if he had ever had sex with my wife. He denied everything, but that didn't keep me from having a little talk with his wife to make the suggestion. My ex-boss claim that I was poaching clients was dismissed when I demonstrated that I had brought many of them to the firm in the first place. A few clients made statements that they didn't trust him after he fired me. I've agreed to handle all the accounts that followed me pro bono for 2 months while I work for my brother for minimum wage. Sarah's attorney claimed I was deliberately avoiding having a substantial income. I argued I was simply helping friends while I determined my future career. I opened my fledgling, part-time, pro bono accounting firm in an unused office in my brother's building. If any of you need an accountant, let me know, I told the group. I got a few cheers from the audience. I felt a little better about my circumstances, but I had to admit, I lost a wife, my home, and my dreams all irretrievably. 3 weeks later, I walked into the anger management support group that several of us had dubbed Cheaters Anonymous. I stepped up to the podium. I see many of the same faces here. I guess you're here for the same reason I am. It's hard to get control of your emotions. Well, let me rephrase, it's hard to keep them under control all the time. As and I'm sure your therapists say, it's a fine line between depression and anger. I talk to both the therapists now. To be honest, it wasn't my choice. I know some of you had to come here because the court mandated it. I'm here because my sister-in-law demanded it. We were all sitting at the dinner table, and my 8-year-old nephew asked loudly, "Uncle Mike, are you pissed off all the time because Aunt Sarah was such a cheap street hooker?" Well, pissed off and hooker are key words for my sister-in-law. When asked where he heard that, my nephew pointed at me and said he'd heard me talking to his dad. My sister-in-law looked at me to fix the situation. So I said very carefully that it's really not polite to use the word hooker, but yes, I was very upset with Aunt Sarah. Then I hit the trifecta of keywords when he said, "Okay, I won't say that again. I like her, it's too bad she's a 304. You can imagine the glares I got from my sister-in-law. My brother was no help at all. He just stared at his plate and shook as he tried to keep from laughing. My sister-in-law told me very quickly that if I wanted to keep my room, I would better learn to watch what I said around the kids. Now my 6-year-old niece got into it and said, "Boys? I didn't know Uncle Mike had any kids. Where are they?" My sister-in-law said the boys were me, her dad, and my brother. Then the little 6-year-old, bless her heart, said, "Oh, so when you told Miss Sandy your girls were sore and tender from too much rough play, you meant because I fell and skinned my knee?" To be honest, I didn't hear how she finished because I was laughing too hard, but my sister-in-law was beet red. Okay, long story short, if I want to live with my brother and his family, I have to continue my therapy, including these group sessions. I announced, I can't afford to live on my own right now. I have no income. I wanted to decrease what I made for the divorce, but people don't realize how difficult it is to even find an apartment without verifiable income. My sister-in-law is a lovely woman and generous to a fault. She just doesn't want her kids influenced negatively by my misfortunes. More keywords to go along with those others I mentioned. So, where are we? I asked, addressing the group. Apart from my sister-in-law being upset about what her kids were picking up from my conversations, I'd been doing the minimum as regards making an income. I've only made marginally more than Sarah before I was fired. I personally feel she was paid so well because she was providing her boss extra services, though, of course, my lawyer has told me to keep my mouth shut about that. Our minuscule difference in income means I wouldn't pay alimony, and he told me not to mess that up. Maria had kicked Rob out and filed for divorce. His beloved car, Camille, is somewhere in storage. Their divorce, as you might imagine, is already messy. She told me in no uncertain terms she is looking for any way to strip the idiot down to the bones. I know she meant that metaphorically, but I hope I'm never called to testify if something physical happens to the man. Rob is having some major troubles at work. Most of his clients are corporate, and someone has put the bug out there that some of his negotiations may have been sweetened by sexual favors from Sarah and Jessica. All three deny it, of course, but apparently, some clients are taking the possibility seriously and moving their business elsewhere. The firm in general has had some problems in other areas as well. They've been handling several sexual discrimination and harassment cases, and some of those clients have changed attorneys and filed grievances with the bar, saying the firm can't even handle their own internal affairs when it comes to workplace relationships. I understand that Rob's continued presence is now more of a liability than an asset, and he's close to being asked to leave. His situation at work hasn't been helped by the number of people driving past his office playing Camille the Camaro at full volume. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, I say, not that I'm rooting for him. Sarah's income may take a nosedive. It's pretty high for a paralegal, especially with her short time in the field. Again, there have been whispers that part of her pay was for her extra services. The same has been said about Jessica. Of the 3 cheaters, Jessica is the only one who might keep her marriage intact. She's trying her best to reconcile. She told her husband, Bill, that she loved the control she felt in the role, but she claimed she never allowed Rob to have actual sex with her. She admitted it was mostly one-sided, but she did enjoy some girl-on-girl action now and then. She's playing the child custody card as hard as she can. Bill told me he's considering keeping the marriage intact if she agrees to a postnup. She's been insisting the client favors rumor is false. My marriage, on the other hand, is over. I wouldn't keep Sarah, even if the baby was mine. All that's left is splitting the assets. The judges, yes, in plural, since Sarah appealed the original decision, declared I was justified in taking back my own sweat equity in the house. I hadn't damaged any component but merely uninstalled them and left them ready for reinstallation or sale. I gave Sarah possession of everything I would placed in our bedroom, but she had to pay to pack and remove it. I wanted the stuff out quickly but refused to lift a finger to help. Sarah tried to get me to help so we could talk, but I refused to speak with her without my lawyer present. My sister-in-law went over to supervise and ensure Sarah only took items from the bedroom. My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law finally viewed the files I would given him and told me privately that he understood my actions but was still obligated to take care of his daughter. I think Sarah moved back into her old room at her parents' house. At our first joint meeting with our attorneys as part of the separation of assets, I suggested Sarah take her half of the household fixtures and appliances. She could pick what she wanted, and I would take something of similar value. She glared at me when I told her I would give her first choice of toilets. She wanted to buy out my half for face value, saying she would hire a crew to put it all back together. I knew what she and her lawyer were thinking, that the whole was worth more than the sum of its parts. As an accountant, I also knew how much I could afford to offer her and still stay below the break-even point. I kept outbidding her on purpose. She couldn't get the financing anyway. I couldn't have done it on my own either, but my brother was backing me financially. Sarah refused to sell to me for any reason, so her attorney demanded everything be sold at public auction and the proceeds split. My attorney argued weakly that we'd lose too much that way, but he lost that decision, which didn't bother him or me. Sarah had tried but couldn't find a buyer offering near as much as I had offered originally. My brother ended up buying the shell of the house at auction for 70% of what we'd invested. The house was in great shape, but few investors were willing to outbid my brother. And sure, several were interested, but they knew my brother wouldn't work for them again if they did, and others in the trade would have followed suit. Sarah's lawyer briefly protested her lack of compensation, but had to concede that the auction was his client's demand. And unfortunately for Sarah, they'd refused my much higher offer. So basically, I lost my money, settled my divorce, and found myself unemployed and living in my brother's guest room with only a small percentage of my assets left. To compensate my brother for rent, I began working to restore my old house. Everybody knew I was the one who took my house apart, but nobody had any idea who dismantled Rob's beloved Camaro, nor any proof. Rob even hired private investigators, but they came up dry. My financials were examined to see if I would pay anyone, and I had to provide access to my cell phone and computer. Jessica's husband, Bill, was also investigated, but no link to any suspect was found. The entire affair became social media fodder, initially covered on network television. You can imagine the notoriety I got as the man who dismantled his own house. I'm constantly asked how I really took Rob's Camaro apart, and get congratulated for something I didn't even do. Several of the guys in the group stood and congratulated me on the spot, to the laughter of others. I stepped away from the podium, and the therapist asked who wanted to go next. All of them shook their heads. One guy said he'd wait for next time to tell how he grabbed the man screwing his wife by the balls and marched him naked out of his house and down the street. We all headed for the bar afterward. "Hey, Mike, don't I rate a little discount as a new client?" Paul Fisher asked me. He was the drywall subcontractor I would met at Cheaters Anonymous. I said, "Hell, I gave you a free setup in my system. That takes some time. You think you deserve more? You do work for my brother, not me. My house already has all the walls up." I was referring to my former house, which my brother now owned and rented to me at a minimal rate. I would be buying that house back for what my brother paid for it in a year or so when we figured enough time had passed for Sarah to stop making fraud claims. Or is it because I offered all the guys at our support group a discount to do their taxes this year? I asked. No, none of those things, Paul grinned. I figure I deserve it for my strength pressing on a floor jack to lift a Camaro up so the wheels could be removed. I'm not much of a mechanic, but I can stack parts around. Also for telling your brother I knew some guys who could help out in a bad situation, and especially my cousin, who was a mechanic. When he told me about a Camaro he wanted dismantled, I almost couldn't see through tears of laughter. I marked his account paid in full for the next year.